I taught a lot of the clients that I have, not everybody that's in the community is necessarily your friend. And that doesn't automatically mean that they're not in the community. It just means that in terms of, I guess you could say, proximity between myself and that person, there's more distance. So while I may not call on them for emotional support, they still exist somehow within the community because they know other people, they live near me, or something along those lines. And this to me again is how do we practice confronting people in a way when we feel that they have done harm? How do we approach them and say, hey, like I understand, perhaps you had questions or concerns about, my medical condition, and I would appreciate it if you would talk to me directly. Um, a lot of the time we don't do those things. We kind of ignore it. And I get it because it's uncomfortable. And then that just creates, I think, further divide. As a therapist, I was thinking about it lately. I was like, well, when I used to teach the interpersonal effectiveness skills in my skills groups, we would focus on a part where how do you make new friends? And I said, I really need to expand this idea because it goes beyond friends anymore. And when DBT was originally conceived, right, we're talking in the 70s, it was a very different sense of community. I grew up in the 90s. It was a very different sense of community from what we have today. And we could look at different factors, what led to this kind of breakdown, in communication and having connection with people. In some ways, again, I don't want to be the adult in the room that's like, well, your cell phone is bad and social media is bad. But I do think that those things are a factor, and our reliance on them to build connection versus having people we see in person or we can talk to even on the phone. Um, but I said to myself, a couple months ago, I was like, I would feel like a terrible therapist if I didn't start to talk more about community and what does that include with clients, because as the world continues to evolve, we are going to need each other more and more. And I always point out, like, if you look at the recent hurricanes that we had right in the South, in Florida and I believe North Carolina, when those things happened, if you looked on the news, a lot of just, I want to say regular, but regular people, right? Your neighbors were coming down and delivering like goods and food and raising money and getting it right into the hands of people who needed it. And that is community, right? That was a need that was very clearly happening. And people like you and I were the ones that answered that need. And that to me is a great example of why we need community. As someone who lives in an area where most of my family is at least 2 hours away, I always think, well, if I fell down and like broke my leg and I had